Chapter 1, Reign in Weiqing, a young man serves. In the spring of the 13th year of the Tang Empire's Tianqi, it reigned in Weiqing. This military border city located at the northwestern end of the empire's vast territory, in order to guard against the invasion of barbarians from the steppe, the four-way earthen city wall was built extremely thick, looking like a mounded earthen enclosure. In dry season, the floating soil on the earth wall will be scraped by the northwest wind. Knife will flutter around, and then fall on the simple barracks, fall on the body of soldiers. The whole world will turn into a soil color. People sleep at night when shaking the bedding will shake up a sandstorm. In the spring drought, this rain came at the right time, and was warmly welcomed by the soldiers. The rain from last night to this time washed away the dust on the roofs, as if it also washed people's eyes a lot brighter. At least Ma Shixiang's eyes were bright. As the highest military officer of Weiqing, his attitude at this moment was very humble, and although he was a bit dissatisfied with those yellow mud footprints on the expensive blanket, he managed to hide that dissatisfaction into a trace of apt astonishment. Making a respectful bow to the old man in dirty robes beside the short table, he requested in a low voice, "Honorable boss, I don't know if there is anything else that the nobleman in the tent needs. If you insist on departing tomorrow, then I can always set aside 100-man escort to accompany you, and I'll make a note of the file and pass it over to the military department right away." That old man smiled gently and pointed at the several figures in the tent, shaking his head to indicate that he did not have any opinions. Just then, a cold and proud woman's voice came out from the tent, "No need, do your own errand." After the other party's caravan stormed into Weiqing City in the rain early this morning, it didn't take Ma Shixiang long to guess the identity of that noble person in the caravan, so he didn't have any opinion about the other party's prideful indifference, and didn't dare to have any opinion about it. The person in the tent was silent for a moment, and suddenly spoke. "From Weiqing to the capital city, the road in this area of Minshan Mountain is difficult to travel, and it looks like this rain is going to rain for some more days, so maybe some of the mountain paths will be washed away. You transfer a guide from the army for me." Ma Shixiang was stunned, remembering a certain hateful guy, silent for a moment and then lowered his head and responded, "There are ready-made candidates." Several lieutenants outside the barracks looked at each other with different expressions on their faces, ranging from regret to dismay to gratitude to shock, but obviously none of them thought that Ma Shixiang would actually choose to let that person go to be the guide of your people. "General, are you really prepared to let him go just like that?" a lieutenant said in surprise. Weiqing is not a big city, and there are not more than 300 officers and soldiers together, and the barracks far away from the prosperous place is sometimes more like a bandit den, and the so-called general is only the lowest-ranked general. However, Ma Shixiang's rule was very strict, or this Weiqing bandit gang leader liked to be called general, so even in daily conversation, his subordinates didn't dare to forget to add the word general to their heads. Ma Shixiang wiped a handful of rainwater on his face, looked at the yellowish-brown water around the barracks, and sighed with emotion. "We can't leave him in this shithole. The return of the letter of recommendation has already come down for almost half a year, and a great future is waiting for that kid. Anyway, he is going to the capital for the preliminary examination of the academy, which is on the same way as the team of that nobleman, even if he sends a favor to that nobleman. I think it's a good idea to give that nobleman a favor. I don't think that noble person will appreciate the favor," replied the lieutenant in annoyance. Behind the crowd, the door of the barracks was pushed open. A clean-looking maidservant came out and looked at Ma Shixiang and the lieutenants and said coldly, "Show me the guide." In the end, she was the personal servant girl of a nobleman, and in the face of the court's border generals, she did not hide her faint arrogance. The Prime Minister's concierge, the nobleman's personal servant girl, and the prince's purser, these are extremely headache roles in the officialdom, close to cause resentment, and far away from causing trouble, the most troublesome. Ma Shixiang is really not willing to deal with this kind of people, casually say a few words of gossip, then waved his hand to summon a lieutenant, and instructed him to take this noble maid to go to find someone. The rain breaks. After the light rain, Wei City looks particularly fresh, 3 or 2 branches of willow blooming spring green, but the scenery is good. City is too small, did not walk a few steps. The lieutenant will lead the servant girl to the destination. That is a simple and lively barracks. Listening to the noisy voices from inside the door, the handmaiden frowned slightly, thinking that in broad daylight, someone actually dared to drink in the barracks. Door curtain was wind-whisked up. Inside, the voice steeply clear, really is in the row of boxing, but not what serious wine boxing. Listening to the content of the order, the maid's clear face flashed a trace of blushing rage, secretly clenched the fist in the sleeve. Let's roll lewd fist ah. Who is lewd are you lewd? Who is lewd I am lewd? Who lewd are he lewd? Nasty line order sound back and forth reply noisy and unceasing, actually after a very long time have not been able to distinguish between winners and losers, expression more and more annoyed and ugly maidservant lifted up a corner of the door curtain, the eyes of the extremely unkind to look in, the first I will see the opposite side of the square table of a teenager. The teenager about 15 or 16 years old, wearing a common military-style cotton shirt lapel is full of grease. A head of black hair I do not know is naturally occurring or because a few years have not been washed for the sake of some hair curls, but also some grease, biased that face but washed extremely clean, so that it appears to be extraordinarily clear eyebrows and eyes. Cheeks of the freckles are also extraordinarily clear. Who is lewd are you lewd? Contrary to the content of the dirty boxing, this teenager at this time the look of extraordinarily focused and serious, not only without the slightest taste of obscenity, and even between the eyebrows there are also a few points of wholly noble meaning. His right hand in front of his body non-stop gesticulating scissors rock paper scissors, punching like the wind, out of the knife with a murderous intent, as if the winners and losers of the boxing to see more than their own lives are more important. A few green-headed flies with strong vitality that survived the harsh environment in the Northwest were trying to land on the front of the boy's cotton shirt dyed with oil, but they were always driven away by his fist wind and knife intent. I won. The long paddling that seemed to drain all the air from the lungs of the sparring duo at the table finally came to an end, and the dark-haired teenager swung his right arm vigorously to declare his victory, smiling extremely happily with a cute dimple appearing on his left cheek. The teenager's opponent, however, refused to give in, insisting that he had changed his punch at the end when he yelled at whoever was lewd, and so the room was plunged into a heated argument, with the soldiers who were watching the battle each having their own positional tendencies, and no one could convince anyone, and it was at this point that I wondered who had yelled out, according to the old rules, listen to sang sang. Everyone cast their eyes to the corner of the room. There is an 11 or 12 years old girl is moving the water bucket, short and thin figure, dark skin color, unusual eyebrows. On the body of that I do not know where her master stole the maid uniform is obviously a little too loose, the hem on the ground constantly dragging, moving the bucket that may be even heavier than himself, obviously very hard. The little maid named Sang Sang put down the bucket and turned around, and the soldiers looked at her nervously, just like the casino hoi polloi waiting for the dealer to open the final size, and it was obvious that this was not the first time that this kind of scene had occurred. The young maid frowned at the teenager, then looked across the table at the still indignant pawn and said earnestly, in round 23, you threw the scissors and he threw the punches, but what you said was that he was lecherous, so you had already lost at that point. The room erupted in laughter, and the crowd dispersed at that as the soldier cursed and gave the money, and the teenager happily laughed as he took the money bill and wiped his hand on the oil stains on his chest before patting the other man on the shoulder in a gesture of sincere consolation. Think about it, the whole Wei Ching. No, this whole world, who can win me Ning? The maidservant's face was ugly, so the lieutenant who had been standing by the side secretly observing her face also looked ugly. He clutched the door curtain with his hand, inhaled deeply, and was about to cough twice when he was stopped by the two stern gazes glaring over from the servant girl. Preventing the lieutenant from alarming the other party, the servant girl followed the young man and the maid far away from the barracks, observing and surveying in silence along the way. The lieutenant had no idea what she was trying to do, and could only categorize it as the usual prudent and strange habits of a nobleman's close personage. Along the way the young man named Ning did not show any special places, bought some food, and the fat lady in the street-side tavern greetings seemed particularly leisurely. The only handmaiden feel strange, let her face become more and more ugly is The skinny lady in waiting in the back of him struggling to drag the bucket. The young man did not have the slightest intention to help. The empire was a country of strict hierarchy, but the people were simple and honest, even in the kind of flamboyant and gloomy land of the capital city Chang'an. Even the most indifferent nobleman thought that he would not be able to look at an 11 or 12-year-old skinny girl struggling so much and not be moved. The army allows soldiers to keep maidservants? The clean-cut servant girl forcibly suppressed the anger in her heart and asked the lieutenant beside her. The lieutenant scratched his head and replied, "Some years ago, there was a great drought in the Hebei province. Countless stragglers flocked to the south and the border counties, and the roadsides were littered with the dead. And I've heard that Sang was the one that Ning took out of the pile of corpses at that time, and that Ning was an orphan as well, and the two of them have been dependent on each other ever since. Later on, he signed up for the army, and his only condition was to bring this little girl into Weiqing." He glanced at the maidservant and carefully explained, "All know that the military does not allow this kind of thing to happen, but their situation is a bit special. There is always no way to force a little girl into a desperate situation, so everyone treats it as if they didn't see it." Hearing this explanation, the maidservant's face looked slightly better. However, when she saw Ning's appearance as he waddled around with half a roasted chicken in his hand, and then saw the dark, thin cheeks of the little maid a few meters behind him as she strained to drag the bucket and suffocated her redness, her mood turned bad again, and she said in a cold voice, "Where is this dependence on each other? He clearly wants that girl's life." Weiqing is indeed very small, not much time, before and after the four people will arrive in the south direction somewhere outside the house. Outside the house there is a small piece of stone ping, outside the ping surrounded by a circle of simple fence. Maidservant and lieutenant stood outside the fence to look in. The little maid to have her half a body high bucket hard to move to the side of the water tank, and then stood on the bench next to the tank, exhausting all the body strength, exceptionally difficult to pour the water into the tank. Immediately after, she began to pan the rice and wash the vegetables, taking advantage of the steaming of rice in the spare time, and then took the rag began to wipe the tables, chairs, windows, doors, and windows. Not long to have the water mist rises will be her skinny body enveloped in it. Although it rained last night, but the rain was not big enough, the yellow soil accumulated on the doors and windows was not washed clean, but instead turned into an unsightly trail of mud and water. These traces of mud and water in the small maid's rag was quickly removed. The house's small courtyard suddenly became clean and bright. Obviously these chores she did every day appeared to be very skillful and fast. Still, a child's little black maid was as hard and busy as an ant, and as a servant like a hustle and bustle, tired and sweaty with a reddened face, looking somewhat comical and somewhat sympathetic. The guy named Ning clearly lacks these two emotions. He is quiet or can be said to be comfortable lying on a bamboo chaise longue, left hand holding a volume of some old books keep flipping through, the right hand holding a hard branch in the wet mud ground keep scratching. Occasionally contemplating into the mind, he will casually throw his hands on a branch, palm up into the air. A few moments later there will be a pot of temperature will be a good hot tea on the palm of the hand. Weiqing soldiers have long been accustomed to this small courtyard daily life picture, so do not feel strange. Standing outside the fence of the noble servant girl gaze is gradually icy cold, especially to see that the small servant girl busy cooking and cleaning process, but also do not dare to forget to pay attention to the observation of juvenile soldier's request, ready to make tea and pouring water back pinch the legs. Her face frost more and more heavy, as if it is going to be condensed. In general,